honored this morning to have we're 2/3 honored. For me, it's not that big a deal, I had to be here. But we're honored to have, it was a have to. There's one of the 3 leaders of the group in Houston, but we're really honored to have the leadership of the other 2 groups that are in Houston. And what is so beautiful about the leadership positions, who's in charge of this group, people might look around and say, well, this person is, but this person does a lot. So we are a group, many groups of leaders. But we especially want to acknowledge Barbara Reed, who's here from the Western Theosophical Group, or the West Houston. West Houston Theosophical Group. And we, so Barbara, would you stand up? Thank you so much for your service and all that you do. And then we have Duke Lee. He'll stand up. And he is in charge of the Vietnam group.
Yeah, the Vietnamese SWC.
And is that the name, is it your formal name?
Yes.
And thank you for all that you do. I want to acknowledge anyone that brought food today. Would you please raise your hand so that we can acknowledge the people that brought food? Amazing job. I tell you, Van, I was going through all these things that I was doing, and Van kept saying, he said, we need to do this, we need to do that. And I'd say, okay, well, I didn't do it. He says, no. He says, you need to delegate. You can't do everything. And I have been in charge of many groups in my life, but I have never really been in charge of a group, directly in charge of a group, that when you need something, people are there before you even ask. And that's the way it seems to be at the Houston Lodge. Before I can get the memo off, somebody's already thought of it, they've got the memo off, they're telling me about it, and it's like, wow, I don't even have to think. This is a no-think job. And so the Houston Lodge has done a great job. And today we would like to honor him and give him our appreciation for all that you have done. I will tell you what I know about this person. I know that he was in charge of the TM movement in Pakistan. And from what I think I know from Charles Rubio, he was also placed in charge of the national or the international sit-up program. He's not shaking his head no, so I'm assuming that's correct. And he has been a member of the Theosophical Society. Well, not since before it started, but probably so. In some other life, he was probably a member of some of the wisdom tradition. But he has been a member for, when he tells me how many years, I can't remember. It's like, how could you have been a member that long? It's like 50 years. So, Polly, if you would come forward, I'd like to acknowledge you with this small token of appreciation.
Thank you.
Presented to Foley Engineer for his service, dedication, and outstanding leadership as president of the Houston Lodge and of the Theosophical Society from 2006 to 2013 from his fellow Theosophists in the Houston metropolitan area who benefited from his knowledge and wisdom.
Thank you, Anne.
Yeah. I do want to introduce a person that represents an energy that is phenomenal. When he speaks for more than himself, and he speaks without a personal agenda, because we all have an amazing agenda, and that is the agenda of wisdom, peace, love, compassion, and understanding, and spreading that throughout the world. And he is an emissary, he's an ambassador of that love, and he travels all over. He just got in, he was in Brazil, he was telling me that they're asking him to go to France and all kinds of European countries. He was such a hit in Brazil that they all want him to go back to South America and speak, and he's going, oh no, I can't be out of the country all the time. He is a theosophical student since he was 19 years old. He runs an amazing organization in which he has no time left for a personal agenda because he is serving us all of the time. And truly a personable person. If you talked with Tim, you would not know the wisdom and specialness that's hidden within that silly looking face of his.
As I'm saying silly because he's laughing. He's looking silly right now. So let's give him a good Houston welcome. Welcome to our national president, Tim Boyd.
Thank you.
Okay, that wasn't too hard to do.
No. All right. I have to check and see how long my leash is. If I can. Okay. I can make it to the water. I can make it. I want to thank you for the introduction. As I say, every time I'm exposed to hearing about myself, it's always quite interesting. I was laughing because Ann was saying, well, when you talk to him, you would have no idea about the wisdom that I said, Ann, I'm going to have to talk with you a little bit later.
I covered that on the way over here. I told you I was an unprofessional speaker, right?
No, but it's true. I mean, I can't deny it. You talk to me and you have no clue. So it's very...
I mean, you don't wear it on your shoulder.
Yeah, I got it. I got you.
You don't act.
It's good to be back. I was, Folly was saying, 102 years for the Houston branch. And I can recall 2 years ago I was here for the celebration of your 100th anniversary, which is, really that's quite a remarkable thing. I remember at that time saying that they say that parrots live to be very, very old. I mean, I guess a parrot can live to be 100, but it's still a parrot. But when we talk about this theosophical endeavor, which really, I'm the head of the Theosophical Society in America. That's my title, President, Theosophical Society in America, which does not mean that I'm blind to some things that might be positives and some things that might be negatives related to an organization that might have a name like Theosophical. Countless places I go to, a good deal of the discussion, once people ask me what I do, is helping people to pronounce Theosophical. It's like theological, philosophical. It takes a while to break through. The name has its meaning, of course, which is profound. Theo meaning godlike, and Sophia meaning wisdom. So the wisdom that is divine. The wisdom which is like the same wisdom that we think of as being that which the gods or the greater life embodies. But the name itself is sort of one of those things, when you hear it, you know that this is something that came up in the 19th century. No doubt about it. Nobody today is going to call this something, come up with a society and say, I got a great name. Theosophical. Let's name it something nobody can pronounce, and that will be link you to a previous age. So that's a small thing. But it's one of those things that I find myself encountering from time to time. Theosophical Society, shortly after it was founded in 1875. Very shortly after it was founded, it adopted a motto. And it's a motto probably many of you have encountered. If you're a member, certainly you've run across it somewhere along the way. And it was, there is no religion higher than truth, which is a translation of Sanskrit, which Satyam Paranasti Dharma, I think it is. So there is no religion higher than truth. Actually, in the Sanskrit would say that there is no dharma higher than truth. Dharma is the word that gets translated as religion. Maybe we'll even get a chance to talk about it, because I do believe that dharma is something even more expansive than that. But this idea that there is some sort of central, overarching truth that we can put ourselves in touch with. Religions speak to it, religions point to it, but religion in and of itself is not higher than truth. It's just a way toward that. So you have this kind of seed that is planted, that there is something which perhaps might involve a search on our part to try and understand it more deeply, to try and experience what is this truth. And, for many people, this approach to truth takes a lot of different forms. Often, a little bit of truth is good enough. To make it through the day, small t truths will do it for us. I recently had, in fact, I'm just 4 weeks out of the hospital for having had a shoulder surgery. First time I've ever been in the hospital. It's one of those things you go in today and you come out today. So it's arthroscopic surgery. It's remarkable what they do these days. But I had thought that I might be able to pass through this life just going to visit people in the hospital. There wouldn't be me. But I went in there, and so I had this sort of surgery. And prior to finding out what my condition was, which it was a torn tendon for a rotator cuff, common type of thing. But when I started to have these pains, my immediate need was to figure out and find somebody to help me deal with these pains. So I went to a doctor, and the doctor couldn't really put his finger on it, or the things that he advised weren't helping me to get to sleep at night, because that shoulder would keep me awake. And I found myself getting up in the morning completely unrested. I don't get so irritable, fortunately. But that was my experience. So the doctor didn't help. I looked there. Then I went and finally I ended up with an acupuncturist. And he put some needles in my ear, told me to go home, drink a lot of water. And that night I could sleep. I don't know what he was doing. And I kept going back to him for a while. But what I was looking for at that time, because of the pain in my shoulder, it forced me into a search for something that was going to ease my way a little bit through the day. And it led me to this acupuncture. Ultimately, it led me to the fact that there was something that needed addressing on a deeper level. But I think a lot of the ways we operate, we're satisfied with just those things that are going to make it just a little bit easier, just to make it through the day. There are those, though, for whom this sort of deeper truth, something along the line of what we talked about last night, the truth related to who am I, really, that's an all-consuming approach, something as important to them as water and food for most of us. And that then takes on a certain energy with that sort of thing. But when we look around us, you try and ask yourself, where is it that people look to find truth? Very often what we look to first is religions, because those are the ones that really tend to talk about the highest things. You don't get any bigger truth than the truth of what is God and what is the nature of the universe and each human being. And so you find people, today's Saturday. So you can go to particular neighborhoods, and this is the Sabbath. And you will find people engaged in practices that have been going on for millennia in this sort of effort to make this link with this deeper awareness. I think in many cases, what you find is a repetition of things that people have been told you need to do. And, so people will go and they'll take communion, they'll do the various different things, they'll bow 5 times during the course of the day and point yourself in a particular direction for prayer. You'll put on a certain outfit that relates to the religious practice of whatever your tradition is. And repeat these behaviors. Because people who have been wise have done this at some point. And so, to some degree, we find ourselves mimicking behaviors in the hope that, it worked for them. Well, maybe it'll work for me. There's a story, a lot of these stories that you find in the Sufi tradition. There's this character that is sort of a comical character. Many of you have heard Nasruddin, Mullah Nasruddin. And he's a character that pops up in these stories frequently. And he's always doing something a little bit comical. But there's also a level of truth to it. But there's a story about Nasruddin where apparently his father was someone who was head of a big shrine, religious shrine. And people would come from all around to visit this particular shrine. And it was going to pass on the responsibility to Nasruddin, but in keeping with this tradition that one should search for truth, even if it takes you all the way to China. Nasruddin took it on himself to make a search for truth. And he got on his donkey, and he rode his donkey in the direction of the east. And he went to all the spiritual places. He went to the mountain. And at one point he was passing through a barren point of the mountains. And after all of these years of travel, the donkey that had been with him for so many years just couldn't take it anymore and died. And so Nasruddin finds himself in these mountains with the one who had really been his good friend. And he buries the donkey and he just sits by there and he thinks about all of the wonderful times that they had together and he cries a little bit. And then he looks off in space and he thinks some more and he cries some more. And so apparently what happened was there were people who would pass along this route through the mountains. And people became aware that there was this fellow there, sitting, looking off, and crying. And so they said, well, whatever it is that he's crying about, it had to be someone very, very important to him that's buried there. Obviously, it was some great teacher. And he sits, he meditates, and he cries. And word just spread about this meditating person in the mountains, about this great teacher that was buried there, the donkey. And so at one point, a rich person was passing through, and he saw this, he witnessed it, he said, my goodness, such an example of spiritual piety. I'm going to have a shrine built for whoever this great man was, this great teacher. So he builds this beautiful shrine. And then other people see the shrine built, and they contribute and they build gardens. They terrace the mountains so they can have gardens that can support the shrine. And word just spread throughout everywhere about this holy place where this great teacher was buried. Word spread actually so far that it went back to Nasruddin's father. And he heard about this shrine and he wanted to visit it. And when he comes, he sees his son. And his son is there and he says, you're the one who's over this shrine? Who's the great teacher? And he tells his father what happened. There's no great teacher here. You remember my donkey? He died. And then these people saw me crying. They built this shrine. And his father said, this is amazing. Do you know, 30 years ago, the exact same thing happened to me. And they built the shrine that I'm over. But that story just to say that very often, because I think we don't necessarily feel ourselves completely in touch with some deeper truth, just the signs of it, what we think are the signs of it, is enough for us, it's enough to draw a crowd. I had a teacher, and there were a bunch of us young guys who were around him, and he would impart his wisdom. He was wise. And at one point they used to describe me, the other people who were there, described me as the clone. Because when the old man would talk, we all called him the old man, and he would say things. I had come out there because I had had an experience of sitting with him and talking when I was college age. And I had one night, and he impressed me so deeply that I went back home and I decided I was going to take a term off from school to come out and really study these sort of spiritual, what I felt was a spiritual life. Because he clearly was in touch with it. And so what I thought was, here's someone who really clearly is in touch. And so maybe if I act like him, then that's what it's about. And so I found myself, the old man he was very sharp. He was immaculate when he would dress. And so he'd go out someplace and he'd put on a suit. And here I'm 19 years old. I said, man, I'm going to get a suit. So I went and got a suit, and he comes out and he has his suit. I have my suit. And I'm just walking. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm getting like the old man. And then he'd had all of these homespun expressions. He was something else. And he'd say these things, and I'd be listening, and I'd be able to repeat them. And so I thought that I was getting to be what it was. And this process went on. At one point, his hair was starting to gray. And so it's an interesting thing, too. We called him the old man. And at the time I met him, he's like 6 years younger than I am now. So he definitely, from my perspective now, he definitely was not an old man. So forget that. But he was dyeing his hair. I said, oh man, you have any of that left over? So here I'm putting this dye in my hair, and I walk out, my hair's black. It was naturally brown, But I had the suit, I had the words, I had the black hair. I thought I'm getting closer. There came a point, though, that what I really realized was this. The thing it was that made him who he was the fact that at some point he had really connected with something very profound. But what made it possible for him to actually make that connection was that whatever his process was, he had managed to kind of strip away all of these things that were imitative. He wasn't trying to be like anyone else. He wasn't trying to mouth the words of Blavatsky. He wasn't trying to repeat the experiences of someone else. Somehow or another, he had become authentic in the sense that each one of us can be authentic. That we come into this life and there are certain soul qualities that come with us. The poet, and someone can tell me what the name of the poet is because it's escaping me at the moment. But the one who said, our birth is but a sleeping and a forgetting. And then he ends up by saying that by trailing clouds of glory do we come into this world from God, who is our home. So there's certain things that we bring, each one of us. Very, very developed, divine qualities that quickly get covered over. And so in the case of the old man, his life experience and what he brought allowed him to uncover that. So that I recognized at a certain point that my real desire was to be like the old man. But that the only way I could do that was to be so completely myself. That's who he was. The attractive thing about him was that he had stripped it down to where the barrier between the personality and the soul had been moved away. And so then it became a different thing. Then I don't need the dye, I don't need the suit, I don't need the manners of speech. What I need is some sort of awareness of what it is that is actually true and genuine to me. And then what you find, quite surprisingly, is that the thing that is most central most uniquely you, is the very thing that connects you with everyone else. That in fact the sorts of separations are artificial. But anyway, so there's this search for truth that takes place. And then we have to figure out what is it that is going to make this experience possible for us. And one of the things, it does seem as if there are particular attitudes of mind that make the experience of truth more accessible. We talked a little bit last night about this whole idea of mind, and probably some of you weren't here last night, so just let me repeat just briefly that one of the founders of the Theosophical Society and the one who introduced this sort of approach to the ageless wisdom to our particular age was H.P. Blavatsky. And while she said many things that were quite complex, she said a few things that were quite simple and profound. One of them being that the human being, what it is that makes us human, who we are, is highest spirit, lowest matter, linked by mind. In the Yoga Sutras, there's a different expression of it, where it's said that in speaking about spirit, that in the human being, spirit and matter come together. And spirit is compared to a man who cannot walk. So you have someone who's lame who cannot walk. And matter is compared to a man who cannot see. So the linkage of spirit and matter is spirit carried by matter, the one who cannot see being guided by the one who cannot walk. So the two are required, but the thing that links them together is our minds. So the all-important thing is how it is we cultivate the mind, how we understand it, and how we interact with it. And so one of the things that you do find is that in this process of trying to interact with the mind, in trying to cultivate it, there are things that work and there are things that don't. I mean, ultimately, it all works to accomplish something. But when we start to think in terms of a spiritual life, then there are some things that are proven over time that are worthwhile. I should do this one thing because I find myself using this word spiritual a lot. And very often with a lot of these words, I'll say the word assuming that we're all thinking the same thing. We all do that. But maybe not. And I do find that a lot of words, as I said last night, change meaning over time. Spiritual is one of those words that's getting a lot of play these days. So people are using spiritual for a whole lot of things that maybe it doesn't even apply to. I used to joke, or I used to think that I was joking when I said that this word spiritual is becoming so used that I will not be surprised if one day it becomes a marketing term. So you'll have spiritual jumpsuits, spiritual sneakers, spiritual spas, spiritual this, spiritual that, and it'll be something that'll be tied to making money. I thought I was joking. What happened to me that brought the point home, a couple of years after I had said that, I was driving around in Chicago, and Chicago's a city like Houston, only much smaller. I have to say I was amazed this morning. Ann and I were coming from her home in Houston to come over here, and so she punches into her GPS to get the route. You look over there. And sure enough, this new shop that had opened, the name up over the top, Spiritual Boutique. I'm not making this up. Spiritual boutique. And I'm looking in the window and it's yoga clothing and yoga mat and meditation cushions, but it had become a marketing term. So at that point I realized, as much as I use this word, it probably wouldn't hurt if I gave it some definition. So at least when I'm saying it, I'm not trying to advertise for that boutique. It's something that I'm trying to say. And so what I'd say is this: anytime we talk about that which is spiritual, you're talking about that which really directs us toward the experience of oneness, of unity. So anything that is expansive, is enlarging, is more all-embracing, is along the lines of that which is spiritual. And here's an example. I've heard the number that within the body we have, I hear different numbers, 2.5 trillion cells or 10 trillion cells. Once you get past about 100,000, it's all equal to me. It's some number that I will not see in my bank account soon. So it's huge. $1 trillion, that's more than even this country owes. I mean, as of yesterday, maybe it's 3 trillion today. But huge number of individual cells that compose the human body. And so if you ask yourself the question, each of these individual cells is a separate living entity, much like you and me. It has the individual cell is working toward certain things to enhance its ability to reproduce. It's enhancing its ability to gain nutrition, That cell is about maintaining itself. And so some cell in my liver or in my kidney or in my stomach lining really has very little concern that I'm sitting up here now talking about spirituality. It's unaffected by that. And so you take the example. Let's just suppose that for some reason one of these trillions of cells starts to wonder, starts to say that, hey, I know that I'm out here and I'm trying to reproduce and I'm trying to nourish myself, but it does seem as if there's something much greater that I'm a part of. I don't understand what it is. I'd like to know. In that example, impossible as it may be, you'd be talking about a cell that has an awakening to a spiritual consciousness. And suppose that that cell then started to engage in practices. It started to study about the greater life it was a part of. Somehow or another there was a book about anatomy, and the cell's reading the anatomy. The cell is starting to try and be quiet, to try and feel the way in which the connections that it has are manifesting. Then you'd have a cell that's engaged in a spiritual practice of trying to understand and connect with the greater whole, which I describe as me. So, again, impossible as that example may be, when we just move it up to who we are, one of 7 billion little floating human entities in this world, the moment we start to have that sort of inkling that there's something more, the same sort of opening takes place. The moment we start to find something like a theosophical society or a transcendental meditation movement or something that amplifies this experience of this greater whole, and we start to repeat those behaviors, then we engage in a spiritual practice. The moment that for whatever reason all of our tightly bound connection with maintaining and enhancing and developing ourself drops away, and we actually have the experience of the union with this greater whole, then that's the time when there is an actual genuine spiritual experience. It's not the practice of spirituality at that point. Example might be this too. So I say that just to say when I'm talking about spirituality and spiritual, that's the sense that I mean it in. I saw a really wonderful photograph. Probably many of you have seen things like it. It was a photograph of a body of water and a drop of water falling into it. And it was a remarkable photo because you see where the drop has made the impact and the surface of the water is dented. But you also see that there is this moment when whatever the surface tension of the drop and the surface tension of the water is such that the drop has not yet dissolved. It's touching, but it's not all one water yet. To me, it was just a remarkable photo in the sense that when we think about what it is we engage in, when we involve ourselves in the practice of that which is spiritual, in some ultimate sense, it is, in a way, to join the dewdrop, the words of Sir Edward Arnold's poem, the dewdrop slips into the shining sea. The individual, isolated self and separated self that we are slips into the greater whole within which we live, the language of the Bible. We live, we move, and we have our being. So that's the culmination of a spiritual practice. So the important thing then becomes, if these ideas have some resonance for us, then what do we do? It's nice images, pictures of water, all that stuff is great, but then what do we do? So there are countless sort of techniques and countless methods that are available, and many, many that are very effective. And according to each of our temperament, we will adopt some of those. But specifically what I'd like to talk a little bit about now is this whole idea of surrender. And what is it that we're talking about? And again, when we talk about this, we're talking about a way of, you could say, of coloring the mind. A way of, they call it an attitude adjustment. I was in Ojai, California, and there was a store that was called the Attitude Adjustment Shop. I don't think it's quite along this line because it was a liquor store. But that's an attitude adjustment, and that colors your mind as well, but it takes it in another direction. So there's a fellow, and probably many of you have encountered the book. It's a very simple little book. Simple language, idea that is exceedingly easy to grasp. It's by a fellow by the name of Masaru Emoto, The Hidden Messages in Water. And it's fascinating to me because what he did was, he was a researcher, and he took water and froze it. Water from various different places. He took water from the Tokyo tap. He took water from lakes. He took water from different places. And then he would freeze it and examine the crystals that formed. And what was remarkable about it was that he found that the crystal formations in water could be influenced by the type of music that was played around it. So if you had certain sorts of music that is recognized as being sort of peaceful and peace-inducing, it would form a certain type of crystal. heavy metal music would form very irregular sorts of crystals. There was no regularity. But then he also started to find that water could be influenced by, these crystals would be influenced by expression of attitude toward it. So even the words that were said, so there were words like love. Actually, he said the most beautiful crystals that formed from the words love and gratitude. And it's an interesting sort of study, and it's something that points to something that is beyond just water. That the thoughts we think and the quality of those thoughts that we think have a very profound influence. Let's begin with ourselves, on our own bodies, on our own consciousness. And so one of these things is surrender. And surrender is one of those words that, I grew up in the age of Western movies, and they used to have a lot of army movies back when I was coming up. And so you hear about somebody surrendering, and it might not be the most positive image, because that's somebody who has just been beaten down and has no choices at this point. So come out with your hands up. So that's what the bad guys were always doing. And on a certain level, perhaps that's true. But I think, there are deeper levels of that. Probably every one of us has had moments where, for whatever reason, we find ourselves faced with something that is beyond our ability to manipulate. It is everybody's experience that at some time or another, the people that we know, the people that we love, die. They're gone. And we have no control over the matter whatsoever. And we have in how we can respond. And we can weep and wail and bitch about the way the universe is constructed. And that's an option. Or we can, at a certain point, the grieving process is such that at a certain point, we do reach a point of acceptance, of surrender, where we acknowledge that I perhaps am not in control of all of these things that comprise this universe, or even that comprise my individual life. And so that's a mindset that we can all identify with. People have been divorced, which is never a pleasant experience. We have lost jobs, we have lost family, we have lost... Life can be looked at as a series of losses in many ways, which mostly we regard as a bad thing, because who wants to lose things that they like? But if we can kind of acknowledge something, there is the possibility of an acceptance, a surrender to something that is greater than us and our individual will. And the fact that we have each had that experience, there is a moment, there is a time when our mind was suffused and colored with this, that we can connect with, because we've been there. And so, with that as a starting point, we have the option of actually developing that as an approach to life, to living, which is really something much more than just, I say surrender. I mean, in Islam, the word Islam actually means surrender. In the yoga of Patanjali, one of the 3 qualifications is Isvara Pranidhana, kneeling to the divine, bowing before the divine, recognizing that it is not my will, but thy will. You know, across spiritual traditions, there's a recognition of the power and the importance of this attitude of mind and of heart, which I'm calling surrender today. So, to cultivate that, what does that mean? How does that express in our lives? As I say, there are countless ways that this can be applied. I mean, probably most of you are familiar with meditation as an avenue that will advance your awareness. But in every moment that we meditate, I think very often, as a spiritual approach, very often what we're doing is not so much, if I take that example of the drop and the water, sometimes I think that what we're not looking for is to actually dissolve into that greater whole. But that what we are looking for and what we are praying for and meditating for is not to become one with this greater life, but to maybe become just a little bit bigger drop of water. I want to be more spiritually attuned. I want to be clairvoyant. Every now and then, I want to rise up off the ground so people can recognize that I've really got it going on. And you notice that I am rising too, right? But I mean, all of those sorts of things that we incorporate. In the theosophical tradition, very often what they talk about is the laws of nature. And you have things like karma. You have things like laws related to the cycles, reincarnation being one of those. But there's one thing that is said to be the law of laws. And Voice of the Silence is a little bitty book. And in there it says, compassion. Compassion is no attribute. It's not just a quality of your personality. Compassion is no attribute, it is the law of laws. And I can remember reading that and wondering. I mean, it's a very grand statement, and it was said by someone who was a very wise person, but unfortunately, I have to question it. That's the habit of my mind. And that's what we're being encouraged to do. Buddha said, don't take what my words are. Try it out for yourself, and if it isn't true, throw it away. So I found myself asking, compassion is the law of laws. What does that mean and how is that possible? Because when I think of compassion, you know, generally people talk about being compassionate. And you know, for the Buddhist, there's a very clear definition of what is compassion. Compassion is the desire to relieve the suffering of other beings. Simple. So, you know, this desire to relieve suffering is the law of laws? I mean, how's that possible? You know, you have karma, it's beyond karma, which affects everything that's manifest. But then I started to think about it, and you know, what I realized was this, that when we talk about compassion, there are a number of levels we can talk about it. And obviously trying to relieve someone's suffering is one of those levels. And that's something we're encouraged to do and should do. But what is it that is happening when we are reaching out to another to help them with the various ways that they suffer? For one thing, at the very basic level, it requires us really connecting more deeply with someone else. And we talked last night about the identity and the way that we have identified ourselves as just some limited sort of self. This is one of those things that shatters that, in the sense that every time we engage compassionately with another, that limited self expands. So now not only is it the way that I suffer and the things that I want, now it takes in another. And then it takes in another. And the extent to which it can expand is limitless. And so, in a sense, it's the law of laws, because ultimately true compassion is about linking ourselves with all living things. I mean, this is kind of abstract, but you take an example of someone like Mahatma Gandhi. And, you know, Gandhi was obviously someone who was in touch with this whole compassion idea. And when we think of Gandhi, he's sort of an icon. I mean, he is Mahatma Gandhi. But what people often forget, there was a time when he was not Mahatma Gandhi, where he was Mohandas Gandhi, a lawyer in South Africa, and just kind of angry about the treatment of the people of Indian descent under apartheid law. I mean, he was a lawyer, British educated lawyer, and an angry lawyer, so what's new with that? I've run into more than one. But in the process of trying to evolve an approach to deal with these sort of injustices that were human, he developed into this whole satyagraha concept, you know, this passive approach to being very active in opposing evil. And he became good at it in South Africa. And then he moved to India. And when he came back to India, then his vision expanded as well, to the point that now it embraced this whole system that was imbalanced in all of India. And with this sort of extension of his vision and of his sense of connection came a magnification of the power and the energy that flowed through him, of his capacity to serve, because he had made this deeper link. So, you know, you see this. And right up to the point where at the moment that he died, he was assassinated. And when he was killed, he was standing there, and the man walked up to him with the gun, and he saw the gun pointed at him, and he saw that the man was going to pull the trigger, and that this was it. And his sense of connection was such that the last word that he uttered was the name of God. The underlying motivation for him had gone from, you know, just helping beings with their suffering to helping humanity with its suffering, to linking myself and my efforts and my work and my vision with that which is the divine source of every living thing, so that when the trigger's pulled, he says, Rama. You know, for me, if I'm on the other end of that bullet, I might have had a couple of different thoughts. You know, one of them might have been, you know, where's the exit? You know, what can I do? You know, I'm out of here.
Duck.
Yeah, duck, something. Grab him, stop that man. But no, that's sort of surrender. Obviously, you surrender. In his case, he's surrendering to the fact that there's a bullet headed his way. But beyond that, moment by moment, day by day, his practice and his vision led him to the point where the surrender was to the divine that flowed through him, that flowed through you, that flows through me, that connects us all. The difference being that some of us see it, some of us don't. But we all want to, and we all have the capacity to. And so, I suggest this just because it is, whatever your practice may be, the practice of bowing down inside, the practice of mind and recognition, first to the connections that we share, but then to the overarching source of all, is a practice that no matter what you do, enhances it. Because it's real. It's something that speaks to the nature of what is. We talked last night about what is wisdom. Wisdom is what is, that we constantly miss in our self-fascination. So, it's a possibility for us to surrender to truth, but it begins with the desire to do that. It begins with the need, perceiving that there is a need. There's an African saying that says, the disease that is hidden cannot be cured. It's only at the point that we actually look deeply and see that something can occur. I think it was, I always get Emerson and Thoreau confused, but I think it was Thoreau who said, only that day dawns to which we are awake. So we have the opportunity to wake up. We have the tools to address all of this. So the only thing that I emphasize time after time, I mean, some of you are going to be inflicted with having to hear me 3 times while I'm here in Houston. And you will find that however it may be dressed up on a given day, pretty much I'm talking about the same thing. I have a friend who is a great fan of Thich Nhat Hanh, read 40 of his books or so, and has made the comment that, you know, each one is different title, but basically it's talking about the same thing. And for me, you know, I think we all get to different points. It used to bug me, honestly. My father, my older uncles, you get around them, and after a few years of being around them, these stories that they tell start to repeat. You know, and they're telling you the stories, and they think it's fresh. And so, you know, he'd tell you the story about, oh, and he'd start, my uncle was a fisherman. He used to take us fishing. He remembered some story. I don't even remember it, but it involved me. You know, we're fishing, and we're on the side of the fishing boat, and I reel in a line, and my line and somebody else's line were caught together. So it was hard to tell whose fish it was. You know, and he's claiming it's his, and my uncle, I'm a kid, my uncle's saying, no, that's his fish. And so then when they untangle the lines, it was my fish. And so he loved telling this story. He said, yeah, well, it's his fish. So the guy says, well, it may be his fish, but it's my damn ocean. You know, it's like, silly story. I don't even remember it. Yeah. But it was something that he was fond of retelling. So I have my stock things that and to me, the central thing is making the effort, first of all, to find out who, in fact, you are. And it's not about the hair, the clothes, the personality. There's something more. And with that as a point of view, what you will inevitably find is that you can trace yourself back to something that's much, much more, much grander, much more alive, much more life-giving. And that's the process I'd like to see us at least embark upon. Because just to turn your face in that direction yields results. And there has never really been a time when that sort of result has been more necessary in the world. It's good for you, for sure. But it's even better for adjusting a planetary direction. So I've been given this sign, so that lets me know.
What we're going to have is a break for some refreshments, and then we'll come back, and you can either continue lecturing as I don't know whether you were ending,
but we do have more time, so either you'll continue the formal lecture
All right.
or we'll have questions and answers.
And hopefully you'll have questions and answers.